Uh, so I just want to share, I want to share this slide. I want to share this set of slides first. Just want to talk quickly to the UWA Employment Award. So I'll just take that on for a few minutes. I a few years ago had the honor of being at this really amorphous position called Director of the Bachelor of Arts. And the idea was to try and find ways of reviving not reviving, but getting interests, understanding the BA. We no longer had a definite faculty as we once had, and there was some need to pay some attention to it, some care and concern for it. One of the things that struck me as I started to think about the BA was, the image issues that it has. I think I might have talked about this before, but the drunken uncle question, what the hell are you going to do with a BA? That kind of thing. And I would really like us to find ways. I think that it is possible to address those kinds of questions in very positive, very realistically positive ways. And hopefully just this little presentation can do that. This presentation comes out of the UWA's Career and Employability Centre. I'm not going to try and deliver it as somebody from there, obviously. That wouldn't be quite the authentic thing to do. But I want to just highlight a couple of aspects of it. So you may or may not be aware of the Employability Award at UWA that you can take as an extra to your degree. It's the sort of thing you can exit your degree with, clearly on your transcript, on your academic transcript, saying that you have completed it. But it's probably the completing of it, or the doing of much of it, that is the most helpful part of it. It's focused around, and suggesting through this slide, focused on research in the area, career development, this notion of employability that is very much a part of the focus these days of university degree structures and design, and the business of experiential learning. I've actually just got an email today reminding me of a process that I've started, and that's with, I won't tell you the group that we're working with, but we should be starting next year. That's certainly what I'm supposed to be one of my roles next year, if I'm still able to continue in my work, is to lead a experiential learning unit. It would actually be a 12-point unit that would be available to third-year students to get involved in real-world research. And the research would be a community impact analysis of projects that are being funded by a particular charity organisation in Western Australia. A pretty significant one. So what we would be doing is getting people to work in interdisciplinary teams on developing a community impact analysis of certain projects. So there's another example of some of the initiatives going on that are coming out of the BA work, and very much focused on social sciences, humanities, and probably the business school as well would be the main target groups for that. So keep an eye out for that sort of thing. It could be the next best thing to an internship, and you get 12 points for it as well as part of your degree. And it could sit, I think, in some nice parallel positions with other elements of what you're doing. Did I hear somebody wanting to ask a question there? No? Okay, so the Careers and Employability Award, designed to enhance students' career development, employability through provision of experiential learning. Award stages can be completed in any order at any time through the student's study, except for the final stage, the reflection, which obviously makes sense in lots of ways. Now you can see, folks, you've got the addresses on there, you've got the slides available to you if you want to look it up further. But it's a program that is designed to get you perhaps more work ready than some of you might feel that you are. But I think one of the most important, significant things of this is that you work yourself into positions where you will have a CV that can speak to industry. You will have a sense of the kind of narrative you need to be able to project and present yourself into that world. But also you will be able to point to some of the skill building that you've done through the degree. And you'll be doing that through what's in it for students, career development, skills audit is part of it, a ready to go career toolkit, access to career development, Virtual internships are also available. And I've also mentioned, that we probably would be tying in this community impact unit into that as well. Extracurricular volunteering activities, etc. Engage at UWA and the wider community, so that you'd be starting to recognize that. How do you do it? Well, there's a range of experiential activities. 100 hours of work experience is included in that, but folks, that can be any work experience. So chances are quite a few of you have already got somewhere close to 100 hours, if not more than that, just through the employment that you've already been engaged with and in. There'll be 25 hours of volunteering, and then supplementary activities from which you would choose two. And you can see this complex here, but basically in the Leadership Ambassador Program, industry immersion programs, case studies, competitions, internships, on-campus employment, online professional development training, and co-curricular and extracurricular activities of these various sorts that would be included in, or could be included in there. And again, as I've mentioned, there are some other offerings coming. Okay, there's one of the testimonials. Aware of skills, know what I'm interested in, and so on. I mean, that's the kind of knowing that is wanted out of this. This is the answer, I think, to the drunken uncle question. What are you doing a BA for? What on earth would you be doing that for? Well, actually, this is researched. This is legitimate research. Deloitte has been one of the companies very heavily involved in generating this research. And what they did for their study was look at job advertisements over a period of several months. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. And what they showed was that what employers are looking for are these kinds of skills. These are the top skills that they're looking for. Emotional intelligence, judgment, decision-making, creativity, innovation, cognitive flexibility, complex problem solving, critical thinking, people management, coordinating with others. I would like to suggest, I mean, all of our degrees have that kind of an aim, but I would like to suggest that the BA is probably one of the better places better ways in which one can develop these kinds of skills. So doing units within that frame, I think is really helpful in developing that. So, my answer to the drunken uncle would be, actually, what's really needed these days? What skills are really needed? And I'd make sure that I had those things at the tip of my tongue just to be able to deal with it. Now, what I'm really getting at there more is the narrative that's you're able to actually speak to the broader society in which you're located and recognize that you are getting skills that are productive and useful in all sorts of ways. Looking more specifically at anthropology and sociology, assuming that we are able to continue in more or less current form, probably less if it is to happen at all. But there are some of the things that are listed within the handbook, the scope of what we're offering: interpreting, analyzing data, ability to conduct research, communication, presentation skills, solving problems, identifying solutions, and navigating issues of global diversity. So cultural skills are certainly part of what we would be promoting. Interculturality, as it sometimes gets called. Look, I won't go into those details, but you can see the sorts of things that are there, and you could see ways in which you could attune yourself to the very things being pointed to here and position yourself into that so-called marketplace. Internship opportunities, worth knowing about and looking at and considering if that's something that you have the time and space and energy for. And also worth knowing about the career services available at UWA if you're not already aware of them. And you can see that there's a range of them there, from workshops through to things like the VMOC resume checker and LinkedIn review. One of the things that I'd really be encouraging you to do is to start looking at the likes of LinkedIn, the Facebook for professionals, as I've heard somebody call it, and which I've also heard recruiters say. I've heard a recruiter who did an anthropology and philosophy degree with us, who had worked as a recruiter. I asked her about LinkedIn, and I was feeling a bit naive. I hadn't looked for a job for quite a couple of decades now. And I asked her if people use it, and she says, "You're kidding. You're kidding. As a recruiter, I use it every day to find talent." So it is an area, whether we like it or not, that is worth knowing about, having awareness of, and to start thinking even now at first year level, but some of you, of course, will be at various levels in your degree. how you would start to address the kinds of skills. What sort of skills are you getting, and what sort of ways would you want to be starting to present yourself out of this, if a job is something that you're wanting to be focused on at the end of the degree. So there's just some other notes about this particular award and so on. And for more information, go to the Careers Centre, go and talk to them there. I'm sure you'd be very welcome. And we're certainly wanting to encourage people who are doing BAs, who are doing degrees in anthropology, sociology, to avail themselves of what I think looks like a great opportunity. Okay. Just let me stop sharing there for a moment. Any questions, thoughts, comments there?
Just a quick thought, Martin. When
Yes,
you were outlining the benefits of doing a Bachelor of Arts, I just had this quick sort of thinking on how UWA could have approached this situation a whole lot differently. So I think, as we know, like UWA doesn't offer double majors, or sorry, double degrees, in a sense. I think what they're doing is they're kind of trying to take the easy way out. So instead of trying to encourage students to maybe, like what I'm doing a Bachelor of Commerce. People like me should be encouraged to do maybe a Bachelor of Arts on the side, because it does benefit me in the long term. It does offer me and help me develop those skills. So I think if UWA had that approach, they would have actually had a better PR in the long term. And that might have actually, and in that approach might have actually benefited future employees as well for big businesses. So I just wanted to add that, I guess.
No, that's helpful, Angelo. And if I may be to continue in the area, I'll certainly be promoting that. But I think we can see it in some of the specialist degrees that are starting to emerge too, a combination of those sorts of arenas that I think you're talking about. So, you know, what could we combine with commerce productively out of arts would be interesting to contemplate. But I think what happened was, at one point we moved away from the proliferation of majors, the proliferation of degrees, tried to bring it down to a simpler form. But I think we have recognized that that took us into a cul-de-sac of the sort that you're so astutely recognizing. Thanks, Angelo. Any other thoughts and comments there? Okay, you know, I don't want to labor the point about labor or whatever it is, but I think it is worth us thinking about these things. Okay, let's go to the intellectual content then of this, of the content, or the anthropology or sociological content of this session. But let me actually make sure that I share the screen with you first, eh? Better do that. Okay. All right. I wish I could reword it. It might be something like saying, you know, dealing with hybridity, it's more about saying different, other. Might be a more evocative kind of title for what I'm doing here, but let's not get lost in names here. Again, I'm just going to talk through a couple of things. So I'm aware that I'm going a bit different to how I want to be with the workshop, but I will give you an opportunity to start talking through some of the issues very soon, some of the concepts soon. So if we think about workshopping ideas, it often is in many instances, but especially I think in social sciences, perhaps arts, we're workshopping, we're thinking with words. So heterogenization, homogenization, hybridity, the stuff that we will focus very much on in the tutorial. Notions of essentialism. So the idea that there's an essence to a people that can be deeply problematic, and is often seen as being so problematic that we shouldn't be engaging in essentialism. I'll give a little twist to that later. But you know, what can happen is that everybody gets made the same behind certain cultural barriers, or the ways in which people think about culture in that way. Notions of ethnoscape and idioscape I want to bring into play. The global melange, which, as somebody has pointed out, it gives that sort of French frisson of excitement to a word that actually is about combination, mixture, or blend, but it can sound so much perhaps sexier that way. It might be one way to put it. The notion of reification, which I sometimes refer to as thingification, turning concepts into things, or reifying a culture, is another way in which that can come through. And then the notion of westernization that kind of sits in and around the homogenization idea. So What I just want to do quickly is clarify, I think, a couple of points around this. So from ethnoscapes and idioscapes to cultural landscapes, I don't think it would work as a culturescape, but that just sounds a bit clumsy. But I wonder if that's really where what I'm trying to capture here in thinking about this. Now, it seems to me that a lot of the literature talks about ethnoscapes being produced about really being about the flow of people across boundaries. I keep thinking, looking when I saw that definition recently in one of the websites, I thought, well, actually, that's migration. The ethnoscape is trying to capture something different. That scape idea is what happens as people flow across boundaries, national boundaries, intranational boundaries, as people move from Western Australia to East Coast or whatever it may be, into different townships and areas. What gets produced through that flow, or how, and what do we, and it's actually an act of imagination that I think we're talking about, but it's not just people, it's ideas that people carry with them that I think is part of this. But of course, those ideas are also carried through the technoscapes, through technology and mediascapes. So, you know, they're all kind of interwoven in lots of ways. But what I'm just trying to invite you to think about here is the ways in which people and ideas, in this instance, adapt to and create, shape, reshape, reproduce. I'm actually quite fond of this term reproduce with a hyphen, reproducing, because what I believe, or what I try to capture in my use of it, is that dynamic sense of the two things happening at once. We are both reproducing what's been there, but it's never quite the same. There's always an element of change to it. So we're simultaneously reproducing and producing something. And in this idea, in this sense, it's the cultural beliefs, the ideas, the practices that make up the cultural landscapes. And the reason why I think it's important that we bear in mind that what the scape idea is trying to give us a sense of is that we can imagine something being there. There's something going on. There's something, maybe it might still be abstract. Culture is a very abstract kind of concept, although it can get very real at breakfast perhaps, or wherever it may be. But just adapting to that. So cultural landscaping is something of what I think we can think about happening through the ethnoscape, the idioscapes of this. And that cultural landscaping, as people move across, can sometimes be revolutionary. I mean, colonialism has got to be a really strong example of a significant shift that happens in cultural practices, at least, if not the beliefs and the ideas. But it's a pretty strong, it has a very strong impact. And then also comes that you've got to think about the liberation from colonialism that's part of that too. Get the hell out of here. And the ways in which that then can shift quite significantly the cultural landscape. But the usual thing going on is a reshaping in small incremental ways, the local beliefs, the ideas and the practices. And it's an ongoing, continuous process, this. I think that's another part of what I think this week's reading is trying to get us to. So it can only work within existing forms, adapting to and with those local political, cultural, historical realities of a place. So if you start to think about when people start to move into places, they've already got these infrastructures and these idioscapes and ethnoscapes in place, and those movements do impact. They do cause the sorts of changes that take place, but much of it is slow, small, banal in many, many instances. So we can use terms like altering, adapting, reproducing, that idea that I brought us to before. Now, I just want to remind you, I'm just using some slides that I've already used in a lecture, but I do want to point out to a couple of people. Now, this guy, Ritzer, is a key player here. Well known, if you want to be a famous social scientist, work out what term you're going to coin. And Ritzer's is McDonaldization. That's the one that's made his reputation in the international sphere. And McDonaldization is the sense in which companies introduce a standard set of practices into workplaces throughout the globe, or a standard set of products throughout the globe. So Ritzer is the fellow who wrote the piece on homogenization that you should have read for this week or will be reading for tomorrow. And the process by which local culture is transformed or absorbed by dominant outside culture. So there's the key kind of idea with it, but also important is to recognize what Ritzer's saying. Nobody's arguing, or very few people would be arguing that as being a totality. It's not, it's always partial. Now, the degrees of partialness is one of the things that needs to be borne in mind. So even the McDonaldization idea, hypothesis, what I think is being said there is that it's strongly, you know, the sameness, the homogeneity of practice and the modus operandi of the corporation remains the same. The products have some twists and turns at the local level, that localization idea. But at its heart, it is a homogenizing force, is I think what Ritzer is arguing here. So just that quote, main point being made, there are a number of global forces bringing them a variety of developments that make many societies and cultures around the world more alike than they have been before. So it's not total. Let's just keep that in mind. McDonaldization, democratization, structural adjustment. And there's Peter C. in picture there. And I'm not going to go through this in any depth at all. I've already done some more of that in the lecture, but let's bear in mind how hybridization, we just remind ourselves of the terms, forms become separated from existing practices, recombined with new forms and new practices. Now, what I think is worth just keeping in mind here, I think both Peter C. and Ritzer are saying similar things here, but it's about where do they sit on the spectrum? How do you view it on the spectrum between a kind of total homogenizing force or a total recombination? And maybe a field is a more productive way to think about it too, not just a straight line. So the culture experiences, past or present, not simply moving in the direction of cultural uniformity and standardization. So is it about uniformity or is it about producing something different? The notion of cultural synchronization, not irrelevant, fundamentally incomplete, but as I'm also arguing, surely hybridization theory is saying that it's always incomplete because there's no endpoint here. There's no completeness. It's continual movement, continual change. Van der Bley, I think, with her notions of heterogeneity is really interesting. It's very clear, I think, where she's leaning in this trichotomy that she develops around heterogeneity, that she thinks that heterogeneity is useful if we think about it in this way as an intrinsic quality of the creation of culture itself. So where she's landing there is very, very similar to where Peter C. arrives with the notion of hybridity, I think. In fact, I think we'd be battling to tease out a meaningful difference between the two concepts in that regard. So it's not merely the absence of homogeneity or equality essentially transforms through the dynamics of globalization. It's an intrinsic quality of culture itself. You know, culture is never fixed, reified, it's never got these essential components. It is always adapting, sometimes more quickly than others. So what I just want to do then for the rest of this time we've got is to focus on 3 of the next 4 slides, 8, 9, and 11. I'll make that very clear. Now, if you haven't got a copy of this, please do so. Please grab it now. Either get it from the workshop site, or just get photos or screenshots of it so you can use it in a small group discussion that's coming. What are those slides saying? Don't get lost in notions of postmodernity or post-structuralism. Assume that there's just a focus on contemporary internet or contemporary thought, on influential contemporary thought. So here's some of the questions I would like you to address when you get into a small group here. What's the problem with essentialism when it comes to thinking about culture, identity, and ethnicity? So what's the problem that's being addressed through much of this writing? Why interculturalism rather than multiculturalism? Why is this term more desirable? So just see if you can do some unpacking of that. And it is the case that that is seen as a much more productive term these days than the notion of multiculturalism, interculturalism. So just have a think about what those different terms are doing. And why do we need to be cautious in employing ideas of hybridity and heterogeneity? What can these ideas lead or overlook? What can they hide from us? In what can often seem like a grand celebration of difference. Yeah, so that's, I think, so they're the questions I want you to pose in the group, to carry them into the group session with you. So just to pick up then, this is just a couple of paragraphs from Peter C. that I thought these are productive to work with. So here's the first one. In post-structuralist, postmodern analysis, hybridity, syncretism have become keywords. Syncretism is jumped off from thinking about religious practices, where say somewhere like the Catholic Church is a well-known example of this, where the Catholicism often got woven into local practices, and so the religious practices in the area became this kind of a mix. A number of the more fundamentalist religions were less tolerant of that melding, of that form of syncretizing that's jumped. So that term's jumped out of analysis of religious change, or religion studies, into broader cultural terms as well. So hybridity, syncretism become keywords. Hybridity is the antidote to essentialist notions of identity and ethnicity, that business of sameness. So cultural syncretism, the methodology of montage and collage to cross-cultural, you can hear the French terms coming in all the time here, cross-cultural plots of music, clothing, behavior, advertising, and so on, visual communication, spreading multi-ethnic and multi-centric patterns. And interculturalism rather than multiculturalism is a keynote of this kind. So I'll leave you with that. So that slide is one I want you to interrogate a bit further. But here's one of the cautions that I introduced in the lecture. Let's be careful of this, the uncritical focus on fluidity and hybridity. So it's a mindset seeing cultural change not only as inevitable, but part of the way in which culture works, can too easily dismiss the ways in which a person or people's desire and need to assert. So if this is how culture works, what we can find is that people who feel like they have been overrun by a dominant culture, who feel like their needs, what they're wanting from life can be missed in all of this. So what we can see as a political reaction to this, and it's probably most evident in the indigenous struggle in settler societies, but it is evident in elsewhere as well, are forms of strategic essentialism. This is my identity, and it's different to yours, and we need to establish that difference and actually recognize and pay it due homage, due respect, is part of what can be happening as part of this movement. So this is just something to be conscious of, the ways in which a particular identity or particular practices can be overrun by those economic, cultural, and legal imperatives of a dominating group. So I think that's worth, just keep that in mind as well. Ella Shoat alerts us to this, and I'm just showing her face and just introducing her to you as one of the key thinkers that Peter Say draws upon. The political portée, another one of these French words that's in play. And I must admit, I had to look this one up, and it took a while to locate which version we were talking about. But impact, importance of the celebration of hybridity. Is it merely another sign of perplexity turned into virtue by those groups on the consumer end of social change? Shohat makes the point, celebration of syncretism, hybridity is not articulated in conjunction with questions of hegemony and neo-colonial power relations. So power is a significant element to think about and with here. And it runs the risk of appearing to sanctify the fait accompli, there it is again, of colonial violence. I'm actually married to a French woman who often says to me and says to Anglo friends, why do you keep using French words? You've got perfectly good English words that will do it. I sometimes come back and say, I don't know that we do. And I actually think fait accompli is a good one. And I'm not sure that we do quite have that in English in quite the same way, but it's a good question. So a further step is not merely to celebrate, but to theorize hybridity. And this is one of the ways I'm framing this. I often want to invite you to think this way about developing critical appreciation of what's going on here. Why are we using these terms? What's being mobilized? Why do we need to think in this particular way, say around syncretism and hybridity? What's useful about them? But then, of course, recognizing their limitations as well. So that critical appreciation. And that's about, I think, the theorizing of hybridity, approaching it with that spirit of critical appreciation. I'm going to put you into groups now and give you an opportunity to discuss those 3 slides and what they're getting at and the questions that were posed just before it. Is that okay? Is that clear enough? And we'll give ourselves around about 15 minutes with that. Just this, and I'll be interested to hear how that comes out at the end. Probably be a bit less, so we can have a little bit of group discussion afterwards. Before we started, I was suggesting to people, if anybody did want to linger afterwards, just to talk through some of the things going on currently at the university. And you got a message last week. If you want to have an opportunity to discuss some of that, then we could do that when we finish off this session. Okay, I'll put you into breakout rooms. Maybe I'll do it in six groups. No, did that jump to 7? I don't want 7. Okay, that should do it. Okay, folks, I'll drop you in there. If you've got any questions, pop back up and let me know.